Deshawn Whitaker. I'm a former We the People teacher turned assistant principal from Charles County, Maryland. These are my Unit 2 judges with me. They're going to introduce themselves. Once they introduce themselves, please introduce yourselves and your teachers.
My name is Joe Stewart. I teach in the Political Science Department at Clemson University in South Carolina. Very much looking forward to having our discussion today. I always look forward to this. Been doing this for a little while.
Didn't realize we're gonna stand here remotely here.
Yeah.
My name's Will Holt, and I'm actually I'm based out of Reno, Nevada. I'm a 1999 We the People alumnus from the state championship team there. Currently, I'm actually here on official capacity from the Nevada Center for Civic Engagement, who administers the We the People program in Nevada as a district coordinator there. And in my day job, on top of all the other stuff I'm doing, I actually work as a nonprofit consultant for a company named Blackbot, and we provide nonprofits with software for fundraising and email advocacy, that sort of thing. Susan, did you come and walk for the cure? That's my company software. I teach nonprofits how to use it. Go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Good afternoon, judges. We are Unit 2 from Grant High School in Portland, Oregon. I'm Violet Hulla.
I'm Benicio Lambreras.
I'm Veronica Bianco.
I'm Beck McLaughlin.
I'm David Eaton. This is our teacher, Ms. Steve Pasquale, and we're very happy to be here.
Okay, we're going to get started. So this is Unit 2, Question 1. Mercy Otis Warren argued that the new Constitution was dangerously adapted to the purposes of an immediate aristocratic tyranny. Do you agree with Warren? Why or why not? What features of the Constitution did anti-federalists believe established an aristocratic tyranny? How have citizens and the government responded to perceived attempts to establish aristocratic tyranny? You may begin.
Aristotle defined aristocracy as rule by the few, where the few are morally and intellectually superior. Federalists didn't think that aristocracy was inherently tyrannical. Anti-federalists disagreed. Sentinel, an anti-federalist essayist, wrote, "The love for domination is generally in proportion to talents, abilities, and superior acquirements." Two of the most important features of the Constitution, the Senate and the judiciary, have proven Warren's and other anti-federalist concerns to be true. First, the framers intended the Senate to be an aristocratic body, similar to England's hereditary House of Lords. John Adams said that senators should be made up of a few great, rich, wise men. The Senate's tyranny appears in not what they pass, but what they block, like anti-lynching bills and voting rights protections.
Second, while the Supreme Court only interprets laws, not passes them, the decisions it hands down can and have had oppressive effects on populations. And in the face of a virtually unamendable Constitution, the court's word is often the decider on constitutional power. The U.S. government isn't constantly in the state of an aristocratic tyranny. The Constitution gives the ability to be in such a state, but it lies dormant and occasionally erupts. Further, the Constitution was crafted by white, wealthy men, the same demographic that predominantly remains in power today. According to the U.S. Federal Reserve, the median net worth of a U.S. senator is 20 times that of a typical American family.
Anti-federalists believe that the Constitution established a government susceptible to becoming an aristocratic tyranny. They frequently pointed to three main features: the powers of Congress, the structure of the Senate, and the federal judiciary. Anti-federalists believe that Congress would use its taxing power to monopolize every source of revenue, indirectly bankrupting and abolishing the state governments. And Brutus and other anti-federalists worried that the government would use peacetime armies to oppress the people.
Anti-federalists opposed the apportionment, size, and powers of the Senate. They took most issue with the senators' 6-year-long terms, which they said would destroy the senators' responsibility and induce them to act like the masters, not the servants of the people. New York anti-federalist Gilbert Livingston worried that because the senators would be walled off in a federal town associating only with men of their own class, in turn would contract aristocratic, selfish habits. Third, anti-federalists were also worried about the federal judiciary. Patrick Henry of Virginia called Article 3 the most dangerous provision in the Constitution. And Brutus predicted that the court would construe the Constitution to enlarge the sphere of their own authority.
Slavery in the United States was the worst version of aristocratic tyranny. Eventually, states like Massachusetts and Pennsylvania abolished it, while southern states enshrined it through legislation. Abolitionists like Quakers worked with enslaved people to organize liberation efforts. The federal government ultimately abolished slavery with the 13th Amendment in 1865. During the Gilded Age of the late 1800s, rich families exploited workers and expanded the massive wealth gap. Citizens resisted by organizing labor strikes, protests, and exposing industrial corruption, which led to the Progressive Era. The Roosevelt administration used the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 to control corporations and protect consumers. Citizens and the government have been resisting aristocratic tyranny since the founding of the United States, and will continue to do so long into the future. Thank you for listening. We're ready for your questions.
All right. I'm gonna go ahead and follow up with your last statement. You mentioned that citizens have been resisting over time. Can you provide us with some examples of how citizens have been resisting that tyranny from the government?
Well, one way that citizens have been resisting is by protesting aristocratic tyranny. And one way was not necessarily by citizens but by the government was after the January 6th insurrection. Mike Pence chose to certify Joe Biden's election, resisting aristocratic tyranny within government.
During the Jim Crow era in the South, the Southern governments, following Reconstruction, had put in place further racist measures such as preventing voting rights or establishing segregation. And the people, during the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s, were able to gather and protest, and with the support of the federal government, were able to take down those policies.
Another specific example of citizen resistance during the Gilded Age were the Pullman strikes of 1917, in which railway workers struck to protest the company laying off 1/3 of workers. And in an unfortunate response by the federal government, the company, Pullman, actually enlisted the help of the military in order to put down these strikes, and it ended in a very bloody result.
In the case of slavery, although technically not considered citizens, many enslaved people would revolt or run away from plantations, and that's a great example of resistance.
In 1958, 9 black students attempted to go to a predominantly white school that had previously been segregated for white students only. And the military in Arkansas decided to prevent these students despite Brown v. Board of Education. And so the government actually responded by Eisenhower brought out the federal troops to then assist these black students to school.
Okay, you talk about the, Patrick Henry thinking that the courts would be the most dangerous branch. And yet it seems to me you've given some examples where sometimes they've been oppressive, sometimes they've been liberating. On balance, what's your overall evaluation of the courts in this context of tyranny?
I think unfortunately, by and large, the oppressive decisions that the Supreme Court has handed down have had worse effects than the positive ones that they've ruled on. For example, Plessy v. Ferguson, which established a separate but equal doctrine, paved the way for decades of discrimination and segregation in the South.
Also, the Dred Scott v. Sanford case of 1857 established that African Americans could actually never be citizens of the United States, and further entrenched slavery's legality in the U.S., making it so that, or ultimately leading it to the Civil War, because there was no legislative way out of slavery.
Further, Dobbs v. Jackson took away a fundamental right that we had, which is right to an abortion. And through this, they also they removed a fundamental right that we previously had, and this will now increase maternal death rates 24%.
However, the Supreme Court hasn't always acted oppressively. For example, in the 1954 case Brown v. Board, where they ruled that it was unconstitutional to segregate schools.
Also, some other notable cases that have had positive outcomes: 2015 case Obergefell versus Hodges that guaranteed marriage equality for gay couples is one of the ones that has kind of been on the flip side of the tyrannical tendencies that they've exhibited in the past and future.
So do you have any overall conclusion? I mean, you've given me more examples of each side. I want an answer here.
Overall, I believe that it has been detrimental because of the fact that the power to decide rights has been put in the hands of 9 people, and only 5 of them need to concur. Whereas through the legislature, it should be where it should be decided what rights are. There's 535 people to go through.
Okay, so are there any other factors or conditions that contribute to aristocratic tyranny in the United States? that do not stem from the Constitution, government, or conditions that are created as a result of passing a law. For instance, you don't have to use this as an example in your response, but our system of capitalism, does that support or does it put down the idea of aristocratic tyranny?
I mean, absolutely. The Constitution isn't the only factor that has lent itself to the creation of an aristocratic tyranny in the United States. First, the fact that government has been aristocratic in the United States even before the Constitution is something that lends itself to the prevailing nature. For example, the Constitution was crafted by all white, predominantly wealthy men, and today, the median wealth of both senators and representatives is higher than $1 million.
Also, the existence of an extremely wealthy class harms our democracy due to the fact that mega donors in the 2016 election, those who donated $10,000 or more, outspent small donors of $200 or less by $1 billion, making it so that their voices are heard much stronger than the rest of the citizenry, when it should be equal among everybody.
Also, although it's not enshrined in law, many of our presidents have gotten there through hereditary reasons, and many of them have been related, such as the Jeffersons or the Adams or the Kennedys, or even Trump appointing his son and daughter in cabinet positions. So, although it's not actually a law that you will be elected for hereditary reasons, it does often happen.
And also, to your point about capitalism, capitalism creates a free market that the government has to be relatively hands-off with, which allows for the creation of a massive wealth gap, as we see today.
Do you think we still need to fear tyranny of majority that Madison was fearful of during the founding era?
I mean, I think when it comes to legislative processes, it's kind of the opposite. In the Senate, we see a tyranny of the minority with the use of the filibuster, which allows the minority party to block legislation that the majority of Americans may favor. According to the Brookings Institute, more Senate cloture motions have been filed in the last 20 years than the 80 years before. And the filibuster has only become a tool to stall progress.
I think we do need to fear tyranny of the majority, particularly within the states, due to the fact that following the Dobbs v. Jackson decision, 13 states already had trigger laws in place that would immediately outlaw abortion, making it so that the citizens of that state who previously enjoyed that right would now be forced to live under a state that outlawed it.
Well, the anti-federalists, though, were concerned about too much power at the national government level. And yet we've pointed out all sorts of problems with the powers at the state level. Are the states the answer to the problems we're concerned about?
I think that the states are just as capable of tyranny as the federal government, and we need to be just as diligent of how we deal with them.
Anti-federalists believed that more sovereignty for state governments was the solution rather than a new constitution, which I don't think is necessarily viable, as I think the same circumstances that we see on a federal level could be created on a state level as well.
So, just to be quick, because we have less than a minute, is our country today experiencing aristocratic tyranny? Why or why not?
I think that we are experiencing aristocratic tyranny with the Supreme Court due to the fact that the Constitution has not been amended since in over 50 years. And there is a deadlock in the legislature where if one house controls the Senate, or one party controls the Senate, can I finish?
Sure.
If one party controls the Senate and the other party controls the House, there's a deadlock where the Supreme Court is the only one who can really decide what the Constitution's power is.
Okay, thank you.
I really enjoyed hearing from you all today, and I wish we had more time to discuss your thoughts about the different branches. We kind of got into it a little bit during the follow-up when you explained how the judicial branch has been more oppressive than it actually has done something good for us. I appreciate your thoughts about that. You've spent a lot of time discussing the legislative branch, but I really wanted to get to the executive. Unfortunately, we just didn't have that much time, but overall, phenomenal job today, and thanks.
Yeah, I very much enjoyed our discussion. I thought you had a quite sophisticated analysis. I wish I'd had some more time to push you on some of these things, because I think one can make the kinds of arguments you're making. It depends on at what time we're talking about the courts and whether or not they're supportive of this. And what the branches want to do, you mentioned the Little Rock decision. When Brown was handed down, President Eisenhower was asked what he would do to help enforce that decision. And his exact quote was, "I would not presume that the Supreme Court could not enforce its own decisions." Okay, Ike, go on back and play another round. And, I mean, so he gets mentioned for sending troops into Little Rock, but that was not his original reaction. So I very much enjoyed the discussion, and I always want to mention each time I see the team from Oregon, I'm a card-carrying saint in the 24-hour Church of Elvis. I understand it's now defunct, but it's the best $2 investment I ever made.
I agree. I think you were a very robust unit. I think you guys did really, really well. In my particular question about what's outside the Constitution that constitutes aristocratic tyranny, you went places I wasn't actually looking for you to go, but you went there anyway. You know, for instance, leveraging your family name, right? Entity, that's a big one. Nepotism, right? The appointing of your own colleagues. You know, using institutions for your own purposes. I mean, there's an investigation around that right now from the previous president. But some other things you might want to look at is, for instance, like wage theft, union busting, the compensation of CEOs and executives versus the average employee at companies, meant to keep those down that are already down. Those are things to think about around that particular question. That it's not necessarily the symptom of the way our government's structured, but definitely it's an effect of it. So looking at those things is really good to look at, because I saw that you talked about Pullman as well. That was a big thing that really stuck out at me in the Antitrust Act. So very good that you brought that up. Overall, some things that you might want to work on, I think, is when you talk about something in the Constitution or a court case. I know you guys have lots of court cases that you were talking about that were bad about aristocratic tyranny. Think of all the First Amendment and Fourth Amendment cases. Those were great. Those were actually helpful to today. For instance, Terry v. Ohio, right? Or, Miranda v. Arizona. We wouldn't know our rights, most of us wouldn't, unless that was, mentioned to us if we were under arrest. So those are big things to think about that, yeah, it could be balanced, it could be not, but I was looking for a counter argument to the, yeah, it's bad, but I wanted to hear, yeah, it's good. I wanted to hear that as well. So definitely think about that whenever you're testifying in the future. Look for the counter argument before you hand it back to the judges, and disagree with your colleagues as much as you can to find the other side of that argument.